Let's see if we're in. Yeah, I think we're in. Right, evening all and no one. Yeah, so this chat today. Oh, I've got myself. Hear myself. Today is a little bit unprepared. I wanted to have a kind of off-the-cuff chitty-chatty about guitar pedals and effects units and all that stuff, especially in our current times, because I feel like there's actually a lot to talk about. There's a lot of different aspects and a lot of interesting things happening and not happening, and a lot of bad things happening, and a lot of weird prices and a lot of great prices and everything in between. So I also wanted to kind of apologize for last week's audio issues, which are now hopefully solved. So if maybe anybody watching, if anybody's a bit quiet here, maybe just let me know in the comments or in the chat. So as always, Peter is there, another gearhead extraordinaire, dare I say, if I may.
Definitely a fan of pedals anyway.
A fan of pedals.
Yeah.
Anything you can kick around and stomp on.
Very much. Move a small dog.
Yeah. Well, at least it's something to talk about.
Yeah.
So I made the title kind of the pedal markets are there too many options? I suppose that is not the worst topic to start with. We're also going to try and cover, seeing how many pedals there are and how many companies there are, and from boutique builders to big builders to all the kind of Chinese imports that you get now. If there's any kind of anything really to say about quality nowadays, of prices, and what kind of people, what kind of builders or companies should we support? Now, I know it's a bit of an open question, considering that it is down to everybody and their own kind of ethos to who they should support, considering that we have so many pedal companies now who all make a variety of things that is all very useful. And then maybe something a little bit more philosophical, I suppose, when it comes to has the pedal market or our guitarists, especially hobbyists, also now in that trap of over-consumerism? Is it too easy to buy pedals nowadays? Has it become a bit of a throwaway society? And the last question is probably the most controversial, is do people actually buy so many pedals because they don't know how to use the ones they already have? I think we've kind of covered something like that in the...
Works in the digital realm as well.
In the whole amp situation.
Yeah.
Hi, Seventh Creations. Thanks for letting us know. At least this time it's better. So let's just jump into the first one. I really think that this is maybe not the worst one to start with. Do you think we've got too many options? I don't know if I'm going to say a lot today, because I actually don't have, except for the last few points, I don't have too many thoughts on some of these topics. So maybe I'll leave this one to you. I don't know if you've had any time to mull this one over, if we have too many options.
Maybe overdrives, yes. I mean,
and fuzz.
Yeah, there's a lot of them kicking about, but yeah, it can be a bit of a minefield, I guess. But there's definitely more of the cheaper, affordable ones seem to be popping up a lot.
I'm surprised.
Hearing more of them a lot.
I'm surprised how good some of them actually are. I think when it comes to the standard overdrives, distortions, I think that's where they shine. When it comes to the more kind of intricate things like delays, chorus and stuff like that, I think they're still sitting 10, 15 years behind. I'm not talking about the quality, I'm talking about what they sound like. That seems to be very kind of old analogy type sound. And I'm not talking about vintage, what some people would probably want to go for, but I'm just talking about it's just okay, it's a delay, bland, there you go, whatever. nothing extraordinary. That's been my experience with them. Like, I don't think I had the need to keep any of the ones that I bought for reviews that are not drives. All the kind of delays and reverbs were, to me, just not necessary to keep. No, not good. Just I just felt like, yeah, so what kind of thing,
Yeah.
With a digital effects unit or something like that at the end of the pedal chain, gives you all the stuff that you need. You don't need extra pedals. That's been my thought. But on the other hand, I've never like went and spent like 200-300 quid on Strymons or anything like that. So I wouldn't know if they are that much better when it comes to, like, to me, basic effects like delays or reverbs.
Yeah, the likes of that Strymon stuff, that is crazy expensive. Like, if you're playing like a lot of ambient stuff, I could see why, because then you can program different ones.
Yeah.
I only use one reverb, and it's just in my effects loop just for solos a little bit and leads and a delay, and that's it. I don't have a huge amount of experience with them. I think I was more into buying pedals when I was playing live more before I got into recording. And now you can just add a lot of effects in processing, and then the pedals are just replicating it live. I think that's happening more as well. It's not always the case, but maybe it's not. They're not as maybe not needed isn't the word. I think the digital thing just has a lot of convenience, and people are going down that way more and more.
Yeah. I go backwards and forwards on this because, like, even when I'm recording, sometimes I want to have the delay while I'm playing and not putting it in afterwards. And because I kind of don't record anymore auditioning myself through the door, but actually playing the amp, I want to know what's going on.
Right.
So I've got different ways of doing it. Sometimes I will literally line out the speaker out through, like, because it's a solid state, I can like route one through a DI into the interface and one to the speaker.
Yeah.
Split the signal up. Sometimes I line out straight from the preamp out from the effects loop. Sometimes I split the line before I go in. Sometimes I split the line after the pedal board. I always kind of like do it differently, and it depends if I want to play something with the delay or not with the delay, or think that the delay is gonna. I'm talking about delay. I mean, it could be anything. If the delay is gonna sound better, right at the end of the chain in the door, right after the speaker and everything. I think the choices are whichever you want nowadays, I suppose.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I made a video quite a while back where because you mentioned the Strymon and you mentioned like having these patches programmed in for different stuff.
Yeah.
And let's say you're a bit of a shoegazer and you want to play and then fiddle knobs at the same time, rates and all that kind of stuff during the show. And so it came to me like the the Wii Zoom G1X on has got pretty much all the effects that you need, and then the nice part of it is that you can then program the foot pedal to be anything in that patch. It can be the gain on your pedal. It could be the feedback on your delay. It can be anything from 0 to 100. So you can blend it in and out. You can assign it to be the speed of the delay, the timing, all of that. So you can actually control it without having to bend down. So I basically made this video saying, well, the ultimate, shoegazer pedal is actually kind of like a very basic multi-effects unit rather than having a pedal board. The only problem is that trying to be if you want to be a cool gearhead at a live show, and all you have is your is your drive pedal and your Zoom multi-effects unit, you're not gonna have the street cred as if you had your massive pedal board with all the expensive pedals on it. But that's why I was asking that kind of in the beginning. Like, I wonder. I couldn't comment on something like a Strymon that everybody goes on about.
I've never tried it either.
I'm just using that as an example because I know that they're very popular. I know that they're expensive. But essentially, it's a digital.
More do some variations on it too, don't they? I believe Devin Townsend had a signature one with Moore.
Did he?
Yes, it was. What was it called? Ocean Machine or Ocean Time?
Oh yeah.
Sure, it was Moore. That's kind of a pedal. Like, might be quite good apparently. I've not tried them.
And that Joyo had the D seed that was also very popular. There was like one feature it didn't have, which people complained about. I can't remember what it was. But I'm wondering, like, most of those are all digital. So, from all things,
I think the mix. I think digital. Being able to bring digital stuff into the pedals to get more out of the analog circuitry, I think, is quite a cool idea, actually. I've got some TC Electronics pedals. Actually, here, that Hall of Fame Reverb, and that's what I actually used that on the actual solos on the last Blood Thread EP for my leads. I actually had this pedal on. That's what Reverb came from. Was this, not in post?
Okay.
But it hasn't, like, there's a tone print feature on this that you can get other people's presets and download them through an app on the phone. It's a bit gimmicky. Like, I don't know how difficult is it to just dial in your own reverb sound. Like, there's not exactly.
Yeah.
But why not? I've got a noise gate. I've got their Sentry noise gate as well, and it's fantastic. Like, I changed that from the Mxr one because I had slight issues with that depending on venues and things. But the tone print thing on the Sentry, you can actually go in and target frequencies and set the gate to just get certain frequencies. It's really, really good.
I'm assuming you saw the videos with where Ben Eller and Fluff did those videos together at Sweetwater, and they went through all sorts of gear.
I seen the one about the Gates reason, but I didn't actually watch it.
Oh, the Gates one was really good because Fluff was a Sentry user and Eller was one of the others, one of the more simplified one, and he was completely convinced by the Sentry at the end of it, and
I absolutely love
away
it.
with one.
It's not even that expensive. It's like, it's one of the cheap. I wouldn't say cheaper, but like one of the more affordable noise gates on the market. Like, there's ones like the Fortin Zools. They're crazy expensive, and Rev has a new one called the G8. I think it's less than £100 or something.
Yeah, I think that's what they were quoting. It was
like
they were all around the 100 mark. The pedals that we're talking about.
Yeah,
so it must be
like I remember being cheaper than the Mxr that I had. I mean, I had that Mxr for a long time. Like, if you buy the Mxr Smart Gate now, it's grey with a blue LED light. Mine was black with a red light. It was that old, but same pedal. Like, but yeah, I just found that, like, I could have it a certain way, and it would be fine in sound check. And then when you play it, if you're standing in a different position, it would start ringing, and I have to tweak it all the time. I hate that. Whereas the Sentry, I don't seem to have any of those issues, and it doesn't. It definitely cuts off more naturally. It waits till the guitar completely stops before the gate closes. There was definitely a little bit with the Mxr. If you were holding and letting the chord ring out, you could see the gate would come in a tad, like, still after a long time, but it definitely wasn't as natural as the Sentry is.
Well, that was one of the comments I made about the Sentry, was that it cuts off the ugly noises, internal noises, very fast, but it doesn't cut out the guitar string ringing out abruptly. It does. It kind of knows. So I'm assuming, I'm wondering, it's probably a digital pedal, because I'd be surprised if you can do that analog.
Yeah, I think a lot of their pedals is hybrid versions, but I couldn't be 100% sure of that one. But it is fantastic. Like, to my ears, it definitely. I've tried the Boss noise suppressor too, and I never liked that. It just does something to your tone that I never really liked. And the Mxr didn't do that, but yeah, it just had the Sentry, for me anyway, worked way better, and it seemed to have even less effect on your tone. As you said, it seems to clean out the noise that you want it to, and it just trails off in a much more organic way. Like for the money, like I can't like the ISP Decimator everyone raves about, which is just a one knob one. But there's a couple of versions of that. There's a G string and there's one with 3 knobs. I've never tried that, but everyone raves about them too. But I honestly would struggle to see how much better than the Sentry it could be. Like, from my experience, I don't see how that pedal could be much better than that.
There's also that one that Mr. Fricker, what's it, the cock blocker or
Cock
something?
blocker, yeah.
And they now have a digital, a VST version of it.
Yeah.
The problem is that I've never, well, it's not true that I haven't used one. I haven't ever used one deliberately. The Zoom, they have that ZNR kind of thing. It's like a noise suppressor thing in it.
Yeah.
And it also feels as if it's a bit of a compressor and kind of like a, you used to get these, well, you still get them, but I don't think anybody takes them serious anymore. These kind of VSTs or things that say they excite the tone, they make it fuller or fatter or higher or whatever.
Yeah.
It feels like it does a bit of that as well, but I've never really thought I needed one or used one in that way because I never played that high gain, and I like feedback, so it's not like I'm.
Yeah, you see, I have to use them because a lot of what I play is often staccato riffs, and stops and rests and things, and like a riff will just chop off and explodes into the next part. So it's more for that. I mean, if I was playing constant where I wasn't didn't have any of that stoppy start stuff, I probably wouldn't necessarily maybe need it.
Well, that's kind of where I think that they were also commenting on it. If you should go and watch this video because it was actually quite interesting. To me it was, because I know so little about gates, and if I didn't watch that, I probably, if I ever wanted one, I wouldn't have known where to start, right?
Yeah.
But they were talking about the same thing. They were talking about this kind of like playing arpeggios or a lot of fast muting, that you don't have a really strange cutoff at the end of a mute.
Yeah.
You have like the really awkward kind of weird noise that comes in that it sounds natural every time, at the end.
Yeah.
And so they were quite complimentary about it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. No, it is excellent. I couldn't recommend it enough. It was definitely an upgrade for me when I switched to it. And at the price it is too, it's really good.
So, as the question was, do we have too many options?
Maybe. Definitely with overdrives, yes. That's it's crazy how many overdrives are on the market. How different can they all possibly be?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are they just sort of variations on themes? Like how many of them are Tube Screamer clones or clones?
Yeah, personally, my instinct is to agree with you. And then at the same time, I'm probably one of the worst for looking for that overdrive which does exactly that kind of sound that I want. And so, and I don't think I've ever found that exact
Never quite
sound that I'm looking for. And that's also probably got a lot to do with the fact that I always want variation in drive levels. So always have at least 2 drive pedals stacked.
Right.
So that I can go from a low drive to high gain, or if I wanted to, or whatever. And then most of that is usually done by pedals and never using the amp's drive. And if it's the amp's drive, the amp would be basically that first pedal essentially that is just like on breakup, or maybe a bit more than breakup.
And then you stack and stack again as you need.
Yeah, and so trying to rely on the pedals to give you the right distortion is, I suppose, a difficult part,
Yeah.
especially if you want something rich and organic and not just, a bit of drive or high gain. It's that in between that I find difficult. I think to me so far, the closest I've ever gone to being really happy is an OCD, the full tone,
Right.
stacked into something that is slightly driven. That's why I like this cheap bloody Ultimate Drive thing that I went and got to demo, because it sounds better than, in my opinion, or for what I want, it sounds nicer than an OCD, because the distortion, the grit is lower down. It's not at the upper kind of frequencies, it's more at the bottom, right where I want it.
Does it sound less controversial than OCD? Are they still in business?
I don't know. Yeah, I know about all that. Maybe that's why I didn't buy an OCD and actually bought a cheap Chinese competitor.
I think that's what everyone's doing now. And the people still use them, put a sticker over it.
Yeah. I find it such a shame. I mean, I remember when this came out, and I was like, yeah, the guy's being a dick, but at the same time, like, if you want an OCD, I'm sure you'll be all right buying one. I'm not so sure. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It created a hell of a shitstorm, didn't it? Like,
It created
absolutely blew up. Like,
yeah. I need to check again.
What way to bury your business overnight? Like,
what was it about? Wasn't it about the? Oh, I know what it was about. It was about the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah,
that's right. That's what it was about. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah.
I think Guitar Center took them off the shelves and everything, didn't they? Like, completely, he completely mugged it himself.
See, this kind of thing wouldn't have happened before the internet, because he would have said it to some pal of his in a pub somewhere, and that's as far as it would have gone. Yeah. But now he had the opportunity to just make himself heard for everyone.
Some people just can't think, and they feel they need to type as well.
I suppose they sometimes, people who go down this route, they sometimes don't realize. I mean, he could have said exactly the same thing at another opportunity and nothing would have happened. Nobody would have said anything. Somebody would say, oh, what a dick, and that's it. And sometimes just the wrong person sees it and makes a fuss about it, and it's the end of the world for you. It's like, it's crazy.
That's kind of the way culture's gone now. It seems to be in fashion for people to get offended on other people's behalfs. I mean, what he said was ridiculous. I'm not defending him specifically, but the culture, the way things is now, this cancel culture's gone. Everyone seems to have an opinion on everything, so as soon as someone steps out of line, everyone jumps on it.
Yeah, but the people who get cancelled enable them in a way that they actually give a shit. I mean, see, the full tone guy, the thing that I suppose is important for the normal person is that this guy had every right to think that and say that. But it also means that we have the right to say, no, you're out of line.
Yeah.
And he's got to deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
It's the way, I mean, I've always said this when I was working in communications and for a biggish company, and they were always, the PR is always like super kind of careful about who says what, the employees, what do they say, and I was in communications as Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff actually started becoming something of a concern for companies, so they were trying to, or they were telling people they're not allowed to, talk about work. In some cases, some people can't even have social media depending on the job they have. And internally we had the same thing. We had all sorts of newsletters, little kind of intranet sites and stuff like that. And the employees in general always knew what was going on. all the bad stuff. They knew all the rumors, you know, when the plants were closing and all that. Everybody knew everything. But from a management point of view, from a PR and a kind of internal communications point of view, management always wanted to put a pretty spin on it, or put some, you know, roses around it, or not mention it or whatever. And I was like, no, man, you're just digging your own grave. People know. Just be upfront. Just tell them. I mean, they know, they're going to know anyway. You just look like a bunch of twats because, you know, the way you're trying to, like, you know, play some sort of a spin doctor game. It's like people see through it. It's just, you know, and it's the same with him as well. If that's the way he thinks, he should just come out with it. And then we can decide, you know what, do I still want to buy your pedals and support your business? Yes or no? It's simple.
Well, I think in his case, a lot of people voted with their wallets.
Yeah.
So,
But I wonder how much it really affected him. There's a similar story. I don't know if you know about. There's a couple of YouTube channels who like take indie people's music and they will put it on their channels, right? Full albums, videos, you name it. Most of them don't ask any money. It's kind of a tit for tat, you know. I make an album, I want people to see it. I give it to channel X, he puts it up. Some of them run ads, some of them don't. Usually the money for the ads goes to trying to keep the channel running. And in that field, there's like one that has made, who's got the biggest channel of all in the kind of doom and sludge and stoner kind of genres. He's like, literally, he's got the biggest and most amount of followers, most amount of views. And everybody instinctively goes to him. And then they started finding out that he was making some really kind of, forget about Mr. Fulltone here, right? I mean, this guy was making anti-Semite remarks. He was making anti-LGBT remarks. He was making all sorts of really, really terrible remarks. It was also the way that he was talking to people who were questioning some of his motives or any kind of negativity. He would like become this massive asshole towards them. And all this stuff was coming out, and some of his, I don't want to say competitors, because essentially they're not really competitors. These kind of people tend to all want to work to the same goal. They want to build up their own channel, and with that they also have a platform with, you know, hundreds of thousands of viewers, so that people can see kind of like more kind of niche genres, music and stuff like that. But anyway, people were kind of like outing him and showing the kind of stuff that he was saying. And his stuff was, in many cases, quite extreme. Not somebody who just got pissed off and went ranting on Facebook and maybe not even meant it, just, you know, maybe just even ranted. Really kind of serious stuff. And so a lot of the bands were like, no, we're jumping ship. We don't want anything to do with that. I had that first album of mine on there too, and I was like, no, I can't be associated with this sort of thing, right? But at the same time, you know that you're losing a good 3,000 views on your album by doing that, right? But you still do it because you kind of say, well, I made a decision in my life where my morals should be, so I better stick to them, you know. And some people stayed, and you know, the reason I brought him up because overall, he's not actually lost that many subscribers.
yeah.
You know, and in that community, his faux pas are actually pretty well known. So it's not like, I would be surprised if any of the people that actually put their albums on there actually don't know the controversy around it. So it's interesting to see where people, how they make their decisions.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my thought on the market is there is too much, but we all like it.
Yeah. More choice. More competitive.
There is way too much, yet nobody's complaining.
No.
Quality. So I'll give this one a shot. So when it was 2013 or 2014 where I decided, I've always had like a few basic pedals, like, you know, usually some sort of Boss distortion. I actually used the Metal Zone for ages. But I was never like, oh, pedal. I needed a distortion. Okay, I'll get a half decent distortion. Oh, I need a delay. I'll get a half decent delay. I wasn't really like that heavy into shopping and checking them out. And if I saw a Boss pedal, I'd buy it. I have no problem with it. And so it was around about the time when I started thinking about the channel and getting back into playing in the band and stuff more regularly, and that the Zoom thing that I had just wasn't cutting it, that I started going to the music shops. And it was just about the time where the Joyo stuff was coming out. So I gave it a shot, and one of the first ones I actually bought was I bought three. I bought the Joyo Ultimate Drive, which is apparently, I think, very similar to this one. It's an OCD clone, or their version of the OCD, which I never thought was actually the same as the OCD, but it has that same kind of feel to it. Then there was a digital delay, and one of these first analog attempts at sounding like an amp in a pedal kind of thing.
All right. Okay.
Imagine a cheap kind of amp in a pedal kind of thing from Joyo.
Yeah.
And they all lasted. All of them, they all lasted. And these were, at the time at least, they were like the beginning of the kind of Donner, NUX, stuff like that. Stuff that you would consider, oh, it's just, you know, cheap Chinese junk. But the amp in a box thing was nonsense. It really didn't sound nice at all. Not for what it was intended anyway. You could use it kind of as a drive, but because it had like a very rudimentary cab simulation that you couldn't switch off, it was kind of like built in.
Right.
It would really kind of fill up the bottom end. And in certain instances, you could kind of push it into a really interesting kind of fuzz type sound because of that kind of overpowering kind of frequencies that came out of it. But in general, it wasn't really usable, I thought, because it didn't sound good as an amp. It didn't really recreate the tone, and by itself, it wasn't good enough either. So I didn't like them, but it had nothing to do with the quality. From a quality point of view, I couldn't really fault them.
Are they metal case? Are the Joyo stuff? Are they metal casings?
Yeah. They're kind of like the standard. Most of the ones of the first range, they were the kind of standard, what everybody now uses for their boutique pedals. The kind of standard aluminium cases. And then when they brought out, then they changed their range, or they kind of updated their range, and they had like these tiny little pedals, but they were full metal as well. And now I think they look really good. Some of the ones that came out, the Uzi and all sorts, they've got this kind of like brushed metal look, and it's kind of like the hard-sided folded metal. I think they look really good, but I've not had any of their kind of more later ranges. But I'm just talking about them because it's obviously, like when you talk about quality, the first culprits that you would instinctively think of would be £20 Chinese pedals on Amazon. But actually I found all of them to be absolutely fine. Like no concern from a how long is it going to last point of view. I've not had any break, not had any that ended up, you know, not working when they arrive or anything like that. They're all nicely packaged. Everything is fine. And since I've been building the pedals myself, realizing how many things you can actually mess up and where all the weak points lie, you kind of go, it's quite interesting that that these cheap pedals actually don't have many flaws. And that's also one of the reasons why I've got such a massive problem with people buying the Behringer pedals. Because if you open it up, there are so many weak points in it that you're really surprised that they don't have a really bad reputation for breaking.
Yeah.
Whereas
you can see the plastic casing is wobbling as you press it and everything like this.
Well, did you just see the video? Because I stripped the
Yeah.
one apart, and there were some really interesting things that I thought. So here's the difference, I think, in the approach to the likes of Donner and Behringer. And I can back some of it up also with how Behringer as a company has treated people and the press and reviewers and stuff like that. I think that KDH has actually made a video.
Yeah, it's quite actually terrifying.
It is quite terrifying, but there's actually a lot more to that story than just what he brought out, because he also just brought out what he thought he could get away with without attracting their attention, essentially, from what I can gather. Those kind of obvious kind of flaws that would make something less reliable over time, from what I've seen, does not exist in the Chinese, in the other Shenzhen kind of like, and Hong Kong K-line and or C-line, I don't know how to pronounce it. And I think there's a difference in the ethos in the two kind of brackets. The one is, I want to make something, I've got a big production plant, I can push out tons of the stuff, but I'm still going to try and make it as cheap and nasty as I can to basically try and undercut everybody else. Whereas I think the Donner side of things, Donner especially in NUX, if you actually look at the prices when a new range or a new pedal comes out, they're around £20. Give it a couple of years, they're £50. So I think their initial pricing is more about trying to get themselves into the market and get well known and build some trust. And then they can say, well, okay, now we can put a reasonable price on it. And in today's day and age, I really wonder if there's a big difference to have a really complex plastic molded casing with a kind of weird hinge-like pedal, or just have a basic aluminium pedal enclosure that's got holes drilled in it. Do you know what I mean? From a production point of view, I can't imagine that the one is actually that much cheaper than the other.
Yeah.
And I also think that if you look at some of the stuff that the likes of some of the Chinese guys have done, even with their digital stuff and their Amsims and their kind of new kind of like, Mxr also has one of those, dare I say, a Line 6 pod kind of like competitor.
Like the Pod Go, the new one, like that. Yeah.
It's something like that, but you know, fairly decent sounding. So I think that they're actually trying to innovate. I think they're actually trying to do something good and good sounding. And I think that's where the difference of the two lies. So from a quality point of view, I'm kind of like wondering if the biggest danger is maybe actually buying from boutique and smaller builders than it is to buy from larger, even cheaper kind of mass producers. That's kind of where I'm thinking from a practical everyday point of view. If it's actually flipped now, whereas in the past probably a boutique guy could have said, well, I think my stuff is probably more reliable and better built than I'm just going to say some cheap Chinese brand. But actually looking at how things are done, there's probably the opposite way around nowadays, especially if your manufacturing is solid, you know, if you've got all your robots working perfectly. So from an end user point of view, I don't know, man. That's the way I'm seeing it at the moment.
the components though, is it to the scrimp on the quality there? Isn't much of a difference.
I think that's the discussion better had with Grant, to be honest, because apparently it's just some components, some types of capacitors, for example, that that if you cheap out on them, they might have a shorter lifespan. Right. Or might not like temperature changes that much or whatever. But in general, most things just last. You know, there's a couple of things like some of the kind of oil capacitors and stuff like that all the vintage guys like to use, that if you don't buy good stuff, then you might be in trouble. But if you open up these kind of circuit circuit mounted PCBs, most of the components that are in there are actually quite unusual and very small, and they're used in everything nowadays. We tend to not have access to excuse me, we wouldn't really buy that sort of thing, but they do their PCBs in a completely different way. And it actually ends up being a more reliable way of doing it in the grand scheme of things, if it's all done properly. So I think the component side of thing, if you cheap out on components, it's not all components. It's like most resistors and most kind of standard caps are fine. But like I said, I think Grant probably will give us a much better kind of overview of this.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I always look at... Hold on, give me a sec. One of the things I'm always looking at is I wanted to... Where's my screwdriver? I wanted to have these kind of plastic enclosed jacks, you know, where the cables go in, the jacks go in for the pedals. And then I realized that's a bit silly, because actually they're more complex than the standard ones that you get that are in pretty much every guitar and everything. That the guitar jacks are used even more than a pedal, you know. I mean, you put your guitar jack in 10 times more than you change the jacks in your pedals. So I thought, well, this is probably one of those classic scenarios where you make a judgment with your eyes rather than with some sort of logic, because realistically they're all just very brief content. I'm talking about these kind of basic ones, you know.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the kind of boutique pedals, they have these kind of like tubes. I don't know if they have a specific name, but they look much fancier and they just look better. They look snazzier. They look more reliable. But at the end of the day, are they really? They're just like a little piece of metal that clips onto the jack, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I wouldn't know too much about that side of things, or anything about that side of things, really.
I am making a massive assumption here, so I might be wrong. Maybe the others are better for certain reasons, but I think they also tend to be more used for kind of surface mounting and stuff like that, rather. And I think that's why they look the way they do. So I don't know, from a components point of view, everybody uses the same switches. And I've talked to some people if it's worthwhile buying more expensive switches. And nobody really thinks that the difference is of any real consequence. I think the problem.
I don't think I've ever had a switch go on a pedal. Never.
I had one. My Tube Screamer, my TS9 Ibanez foot switch went, and it didn't last very long at all. Maybe 3 years, 4 years.
I tend to not do too much actual switching. Like most of my, like for me, an overdrive is just for tightening the amp. It never really comes off.
Yeah.
So it's just on. So when I plug in the power supply, the pedal's just on. The only real switching I do is just the wah pedal and the whammy pedal, and an effects loop for leads, and that's it. pretty much.
Yeah.
So I've never had any issues. Funny. The wah pedal I've got, I don't think you could break the switch on that if you tried. I had to get Grant to do a mod on it to slacken it off because it was so hard to push down.
Yeah.
And it was one of them situations, you know, where you to say you find out any issues with your gear, you find out when you play live.
Yeah. Obviously.
That's when I would have issues with that pedal. But I'd lean on it and think I had it turned off, and then stand off it and realize I hadn't.
But have you actually had any pedals fail in you?
No, I can't. No, the Zoom 707 if you count that, but actual pedals not. I've never had any.
Because I'm trying to think. I don't think I have either. And I even had those plastic Rocktex when I first started playing. You know, those plastic. I mean, actually, I've seen some on the JHS show. I've actually seen the same distortion pedal that I had in 1996. That's what I like about watching his show, because actually it's more like a nostalgia trip. Not to like, oh, vintage gear and this, that, and the other, but actually the kind of crap I had to deal with 25 years ago.
Yeah. Distortion pedals are hideous. I can remember years back, my first band in Ireland, I think I had some issue with an amp or something, and we had to practice. Someone had this black distortion pedal. I can't even remember what it was called. Awful thing, like so noisy, it was unreal.
Was it a plastic one?
I think so, yeah, it was black.
Because there weren't a lot of plastic ones about. There was Rocktech, then there was another brand which the case looked just like the Rocktechs, and then there were those sound tanks. Remember the Ibanez sound tanks?
Yeah.
They were like these weird, kind of weirdly overly shaped, also really just thin plastic. Even the kind of foot switch was this kind of like, you know, when you've got like a piece cut out with a little switch inside of it that just goes up and down. Those were the cheap things in my day. Was the Rocktech and the Ibanez sound tanks. There was no Behringer that I can remember. Boss pedals were, for me at the time, too expensive. Think about that for a minute. Like, the Boss pedal is too expensive for me.
No. Nowadays they're everywhere.
In the scheme of things, yeah. Well, some of them are still a good, 120, 130?
Yeah.
But actually, that's good we just mentioned that, because we actually, prices of pedals. So again, I see it from two different ways. At the moment, firstly, the prices are all over the show. One pedal is £20, the next one is $5,000. I mean,
yeah, fairly wide discrepancies, yeah.
But even just in the general pedals, like I find them expensive in general, and at the same time, I find like it's like some I understand it and actually don't mind it. If I just think about how much time I put into a pedal and what I'm selling them for, it's like I should be charging 3 times the amount.
I think Grant says that as well. I remember asking Grant quite a few years ago how many hours it takes him to make. Do you remember the original Mega Para, the gold one? I can't remember what he said. It was crazy how many hours it take between all the solder, all the painting, and all the lacquer and all that. It was like crazy.
Yeah, it really is.
A labor of love.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. And so but at the other end though, you're going to say, well, okay, so here's a big manufacturer who can pump out, I don't know, a couple of thousand a day on some sort of production line and cheap labor or something, whatever. But at the same time, they also have their costs. They've got marketing costs. They've got distribution costs. They've got all sorts of costs associated with that pedal. to actually get it into somebody's hands. So
Yeah.
since I've been working for myself, I've kind of completely changed the way I perceive what something is worth.
Yeah.
It's the same with, like, sometimes you trying to, like, I try and make them as good as I possibly can, but at the same time, it is because, sorry, at the same time, you're always thinking of ways to make things go faster and cheaper for yourself.
Yeah.
But the way I see it is like, if somebody makes the effort of buying something from you, they make like a bit of a trust transaction.
Yeah.
So, and also, I don't want to. I'm talking from myself now, right? And because it's the only way I can try and actually word it. The way I see it is kind of like anything that you make that you want somebody to buy. You want them to appreciate it. And you also want them to keep it. What I mean by that is you want them to be able to get joy out of that thing for a long time. So you can see that two ways. Number one, you need to make the effort that that person gets something that is really worthwhile for him, that he enjoys, that he likes the look of, that he wants to use. But that also then reflects back again. So if somebody gets that out of something that he buys, then they should also put value to that thing, which in the only way we can nowadays is by financial reward, right? So if I buy something, if I buy a pedal and I really, really like it, and I'm be using it for the next 10 years, surely that's worth more than £100 of my investment. Maybe it's even worth £200, £300. Because sometimes value is not just that, okay, how much did it cost to make? Sometimes there's more behind the value. There's like appreciation and what do you get out of it? So that's why I think sometimes you need to kind of look at everything separately. You can't say, oh, pedals are expensive or cheap. You've got to look at every single pedal brand and every single one in the range and go, well, is this an appropriate price? Is this an appropriate price? Is this worth me spending this on it? I mean, this whole clon thing, for example, is an absolute ridiculous. It just shows you how stupid humanity is. It doesn't do anything other than that. It just shows you how absolutely fucking ridiculously dumb some people are to spend something money like that on a fucking pedal, right? That is just like cloned to death, and you get exactly the same sound out of it.
That's
so
crazy.
it just boggles me. But for somebody who really wants a clone and really wants that tone and loves that aesthetic of it, to pay £200-300 for it, completely understand it. I personally completely get it. But when you get to the £1,000, £2,000, £5,000, then it's when it becomes a joke. Because like I said, it's like if that person really values that thing that much and he's really going to get years of joy out of it, yeah, a couple of £100, completely understand it. Grant's Vega Para is way too cheap.
Yes.
It's like not just how much effort goes into it, but also what the person actually receives, what that person can do with that thing, how complex and how useful this can be in so many scenarios. Is way too cheap. Way too cheap. Then I follow a lot of people on Instagram, people like me who are basically building a couple of pedals a day, maybe everything hand done. Most of them do kind of fuzzers, drives, boosts. A lot of them are takes on existing circuits that we all know, usually fairly simple circuits. And there's where I kind of see the weird pricing, where you go, well, some of it is way too cheap, some of it is way too expensive. And then there are some people, as you mentioned this earlier, about the parts, where they actually make a lot of effort to find the parts that people really want in a certain pedal, like certain caps from a certain era or from a certain maker. And I get that, because that then means that they're not just spending time building the pedal, they're also spending time buying and sourcing really kind of rare stuff. Sometimes stuff that's been out of production for years. I'm going to mute myself. I need to cough again. I don't know what's going on tonight.
Too much whiskey.
So, yeah. I don't know what your feeling is.
Do you find the boutique market, there seems to be a lot of them springing up, like what yourself was doing? Do you think the way it looks is a factor as well? Like some of them are doing like really cool artwork or crazy artwork or different the way they name them and things. Do you think that the need to do that to stand out, or does it help? I suppose anything that makes you stand out in any market in any way is going to be a help, I guess.
Well, oh man, do we have another 2 hours? No, I think that this is a big topic, because yes, I do. I think it makes a massive difference to some. There's a reason one guy goes and buys a Behringer pedal, and there's a reason one guy spends 200, 300 pounds on Revo's electric is one of them, for example. I mean, it's an artwork. The pedal is an artwork from top to bottom, inside out. The components he puts in there, the way the whole internal pedal is built, there's not a PCB inside. It's all point to point, but it's not just like the old amps were point to point, some wire from here to there. It's like everything is like, you look at the thing in the inside and it's like, this is just beautiful. Like every solder point is perfection. It's gleaming, you know, everything. Yeah. So you can see that there's craft behind it. So I think in those cases there's this overlap between, I want this drive fuzz circuit, but I also want something really special. And I mean special not in the clone way, but special in, you know, that somebody sat there and made a little piece of art.
Yeah.
You know, so you're buying two things. In some cases, there's a couple of people I like. Well, from a pure aesthetics point of view, nowadays, if you've got a bit of money, or if you do some planning, you can do the artwork for the pedals quite nicely, because you get these UV printers. So if you look at, do you know VFE?
No.
VFE pedals, GH effects pedals. I think this guy, which I don't really want to mention because I can't. Yeah. Anyway, there's a guy.
Rob's Nick's a band name. That guy.
There's a guy south of me who does nothing but clones and has done for ages, and I think from what I gather is he managed to, or he was clever enough to invest fairly recently, maybe a year or two ago tops, into one of these printers.
Right.
And what it allows you to do, it's like an inkjet, but with specialized UV ink, and it can also take any color, so you're not just limited to CMYK. So you can print white, you can print whatever color you want, really. If you can buy the ink, you can print it. And what and so you can print the pedal, and it's 100% exact. And it even has, because it's like this ink, that it comes out like a thick gel, and then there's a UV light which instantly cures it. So you can touch that thing a few seconds after it's printed. But it allows you to do any artwork you want because it's a printer. But it doesn't look like a printer, like somebody who does water slides on their pedal or anything. It's absolutely looks amazing. So once you have that sort of gear, you can then do your own. You can do other people's stuff. You know, you can do people's iPhone covers. You can do whatever you want with them. But what's so good about it is that it looks so professional. It looks so absolutely professional. The finish on it, the way that it's printed. So that goes the other way. That's not kind of like I like sand the enclosures down. I put a base layer on, then I put another layer on, then I make sure there's no cat hair in it, and then I engrave laser my own artwork into it, and then I need to coat it. So it is like this long-winded thing to try and get a nice aesthetic, but a certain kind of aesthetic to it. Whereas what they can do is they can take any image. They can have an artist draw an immaculate kind of bespoke piece of artwork that they can then just print on their pedal, and it looks amazing. You know, it's so. And I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people buy into that, and I completely get it, because we do also enjoy things with our eyes. You know, it's not just a functional item.
Or you want something a bit unique as well, or different. Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. That. It allows you to like decide from one day to the next you want to change the artwork. Like if you use silk screening methods or used some supplier, there's this change problem. Whereas with the printer, you just go, okay, I'll just print this image now.
Yeah.
Done, right? And the other thing about the ink is that it's very durable. So it's really resistant to chipping and stuff like that.
So you could kick the crap out of it live and it'd be okay.
Yeah, you can. No, the inks are made for that. They're really, really durable. So, but yeah, I think the aesthetics mean a lot, and I think that's why. I think that's the part of the boutique market that I actually appreciate the most. Is what some people do with the aesthetic of the pedal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some of them that literally take the time to etch it. I mean, I can do it too, but it takes so long. And it's such a balancing act to etch things, you know, with acid, to etch those drawings or whatever you want to etch in it. And it doesn't always work 100%. You can probably, I would say, I wouldn't be surprised if the people who do it regularly, they lose one enclosure out of 4 or 5 that are the etching just didn't come out right or good enough for them. So there will probably be a fair amount of loss in that process. But I appreciate stuff like that, because I appreciate people putting that kind of like, I want them to look like this, so I'm going to etch them because that's the only way I'm going to get that look. Or I'm going to silk screen it because that's the only way I'm going to get that look. I really appreciate it. And I personally would spend, if I wanted something like that, I would spend decent money for it if I had it. I wouldn't have a problem with it, because I know that person had to put so much love and care into doing that, that to me it's worth it. He's worth it. That person, that company, that is worth it.
It's funny, I think everybody has something, some interest or something that they'll happily spend money on. You know, like above what a lot of people would think is too much. And then other things then you won't spend, like, no, I'm not buying that, I'm not spending that, but then you go and spend.
No, you're right. Because in general, I'm very practical. I'm not frugal, but I'm very practical with things. Like, like I will not buy an expensive item if I can buy a reasonable item that is good. I don't need, like, if I don't think if I ever became a millionaire, I would not drive a Lamborghini. I just wouldn't. I would drive a normal car. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you play a clown into a dumble.
But I might, a Dumble, yeah, maybe. Well, no, see, that's a step too far again, because again, what are they going for? 60, 70 grand?
Yeah, it's crazy. He actually passed away, didn't he? Yesterday.
He did, yeah, yesterday or the day before. Yeah. No, I think there's a limit to my appreciation of certain things.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But you understand that, right? Because it's not. It's like when somebody really brings. Sometimes you don't realize that somebody is actually exposing themselves to you. If somebody puts that amount of
came out wrong.
I know, as I said it, and I thought I'm just going to let this go. I'm going to wait for you to make the comment. No, but if you look at certain people, at what they produce, and they might be, let's say, a very quiet person. You can't read them. Sometimes you can see what's going on up there if you see what they produce. Like, let's say they make a pedal, and you see how they approach the artwork, how they approach the enclosure, stuff like that. I think you can read into people in certain things. And that's why with the boutique market, that's what I'm saying. I think that there's such a variety. Some of it is just meh, but some of it is just so interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of why I like Grant stuff, because like when you know him, he's always thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
And his pedals is like that as well. Like there'll be some spin or something different on it. Like he built me an Overdrive before. I had my old band's logo on it, had the Bloodthread logo on it, and I remember the conversation initially started. I was going to get the TS9 I had at the time modded to a bit more like the TS808, the 808 one, and that's how the conversation started, and it turned into him building me a custom pedal. And I remember, hope he's not listening to this. We need to talk about Grant a fair bit, but I woke up the next morning. I woke up the next morning. I had this big, massive Facebook message about this idea he had. It was the pre-tone section about putting this thing into the pedal, and a big, long explanation about how it was going to work. And if it didn't work, it was fine. You could just disable it. And I'm like, I have no idea what any of this means, but I don't want to like cock block him from inventing something new here or something different. You know, like so. It's like, and you go, and it ended up in one of the things I liked about it the most. But yeah, he always seems to try to think of something left of center with everything.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to mention he's one of those people who expose himself through the things he's actually doing more than he does through what he actually tells you.
Yeah.
Don't tell him that. I hope he's not watching this. I think that, and what's interesting about pedals is that it's not. Pedals appeal to people on so many different levels. I think some people just want to make music. I need a tool. This one does that. This one does that. End of story, right? The best one, the one that fits the most, fits the best for what they're trying to do. They buy it and they get on with it. Other people, I think, are truly interested in maybe the kind of more techie side behind it and what makes it trick. All that, and then there's people who are just hobbyists. They just keep buying pedals and testing them out and selling them again and trying that one and trying that. And I think there's so many different people that buy pedals for so many different reasons, and I think that's why the market is so saturated, because it can be, because there's enough people interested in it for many different reasons. And so, and I think that's also why, why I've managed to sell anything. It's like, I was surprised, I mean, you would imagine like somebody goes, oh, who's this new guy? but people do. People
Wanna
actually
try it.
go, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
maybe sometimes you think trying to explain too much what the pedal does and having really detailed demos of it might actually be the wrong thing, because maybe the interest is the things that you don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that sounds interesting, let's give it a shot. I mean, after this pandemic and after what 30% living cost rises that they're predicting, I don't think anybody's gonna have money for anything anymore. But hey,
No, we'll all be buying the Behringers.
yeah,
Behringer will
we'll
be the new boutique.
we'll be selling our Behringers, never mind buying them. But see, that's the thing about Grant. I've been telling him, you see the Mega Para, especially the latest version with all the trimmings and everything. I told him he needs to build that into a rack unit. The
It's like a studio tool in a pedal, isn't it?
that's exactly, the studios will lap that shit up. They will buy it, and they will pay good money for it because it's a really good piece of kit, and it's really useful.
He built I still use the HD Boost. Did you ever try that?
Mm.
It was the very first pedal I think he brought out. Or one of. No, there's the Dysphoria Distortion and the HD Boost was the first two.
Yeah, no, I didn't try the HD. I don't think so. I think it was the Ampfister and the Dysphoria.
Yeah, that actually, I think it was my Ampfister you demoed, wasn't it?
It could have been.
I remember. I think I sent you that. I'm pretty sure it did.
It could be. It could be the one you sent. The Dysphoria. I just remember having. Yeah, the Dysphoria, the Amphister, and the first or the second Mega Para.
Yeah, the HD Boost. I don't think he makes it anymore, but that is an amazing pedal. Even it really high headroom. And,
well, when I did the video, sorry to interrupt, but when I did the video for the Amphister, I deliberately, I think, made the thumbnail something like the Tube Screamer Killer.
Yeah.
Because I've said this 100 times, I don't think the Tube Screamer is the best pedal to put for the use that everybody uses the Tube Screamer for. But anyway, sorry.
The HD Boost, that actually, you know, the 5150 amps, they're notorious for the clean channel being really rubbish. Like it basically sounds like mine has the sheer DQ, so you can't even EQ unless you have the plus model, and the clean channel is so dull. It sounds like as if your guitar has had strings on them for 3 years, like really flat and awful.
Yeah.
And I actually noticed almost by accident, because I was running the HD Boost in the effects loop for leads, that when I flicked to the clean channel and just left the boost on, it brought all the headroom back and made the clean channel sound really good.
But you had it in the effects loop.
Yeah, in the effects loop for boosted solos.
Oh, right, okay.
Running the effects loop for boosted solos. And I think I was messing around and I had switched to the clean channel just when I was messing around and I hadn't turned off the effects loop. And the clean channel sounded amazing. I even brought Grant into the studio with me to hear that. Like, you could mark something here, because this actually makes this clean channel not just sound usable, but actually sound really good. Like, really brought it to life. Like, massive difference just by being on.
Well, I think that was, I don't know if that was part of the kind of like musing for the boost pedal that I'm putting out.
Right.
So I'm limiting everything down to 3: a boost pedal, the fuzz pedal, and the kind of high gain distortion-y thing. And this is supposed to do basically the same thing as the Amphister did. And it was basically, you've got a really high decibel kind of boost, but it's dirty. It's not clean. It's kind of got a bit of dirt in it. By itself, it doesn't really sound very nice. It only starts sounding nice once it's in a kind of like a slight drive channel or a crunch channel. especially if the amp's got a lot of clean headroom, it won't sound very nice. But the moment it goes into some sort of compression, it sounds really nice. And then you've got a massive EQ sweep all the way from very low to very high, and you can cut the bottom end off completely to tighten up chugs, essentially. But it was basically that the Amphister that kind of got me thinking that the way that the Tube Screamer shaves it off at an angle, the bottom frequencies, is not where I want it. Now, it might not be where everybody else wants it, but I wanted that frequency to be flat, but the bottom end from about, I don't know, 100 to be just essentially cut off. And that's why I kind of messed around with this one so much until I was kind of happy with it. It was also what I tried to do with the butt clencher.
Right.
But it I couldn't get that top kind of squeal out, and it kind of made it a little bit. It sounds okay. It's just it wasn't right. It wasn't right. It wasn't right.
Yeah.
But I think messing around with this stuff allows you to play with this stuff as well. Like when you only buy and you're looking for the right thing, then, and if you're really picky, you're never going to be 100% happy, because you're always buying somebody else's idea, right?
Yeah.
But when you start messing with this yourself, you can start going, well, actually, I still wanted this. Maybe this can work. Maybe there's no market for it, but that's not really the point. The point is that you can sit here and, you've got something fun to do.
Isn't it funny how as guitar players there's always something else, or we're always chasing something else? Like it's never ended, is it? Like,
well, to me, I wouldn't say I'm like that. There's a few things that I really want, and I've never found that 100%. I don't really change the overall kind of tone that I'm wanting. It is a few parameters that I really like that I try to find the best of, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So here's the thing. I don't know if you saw that video of Tamsin learning toxicity.
System, yeah.
You have no idea. I sometimes just well up and I just want to cry. I'm so flippin' proud and pleased and anything. Anyway, so I downloaded the MIDI map for it, right, for the drums, and I put the guitar in today, so that when she comes home, she can record the piano pieces. So she did the first few piano pieces on it, and I'm like, this is so cool, right? So now she wants to sing it. Anyway, I'm drifting off why I mentioned this. I was lazy, so I just used my Blackstar HT for distortion into the Pectifier. No, the Gerber, which is the Dietzel VST, into my own IRs. And within a couple of minutes, I had that tone, that really high gain but clear tone that they have in the recording. And it was like, that sounds great. This sounds really cool. But it's like sometimes you find these tones which you really like, but actually overall there's a couple of things that I'm really after. That's also kind of why I did the fuzzes the way I did. It's not because I'm actually not a big fuzz fan, but I realize that's because I don't actually like the majority of the tones that fuzzes have. But there are certain things in some fuzzes which are really nice, and I try to only kind of keep them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The one you sent me, like, I have no experience with fuzzes at all, so like I couldn't tell you a good one from a bad one. But it wasn't as much fuzzy and unusable as I thought it was going to be.
No, they aren't, and I think that's part of the problem. It's like, Brooke, Chris's girlfriend.
Yeah.
she had the dark glass for her fuzz tones, and she bought one of the first Herschel fuzzes for her bass. And Chris told me that she stopped using the dark glass for the fuzz and used the Herschel for a fuzz because she preferred it. And I completely understand that, because bass is to me a big deal, the sound of the bass, especially in a mix. And if you listen to people who put a lot of fuzz on their, or distortion on their bass, the bass loses all its power.
Yeah.
It has like a dull low end and the fizz at the top end, but you actually want a rumble and a thud in the low end with a bit of a clear spike somewhere that is audible, so that you can hear. Kohler calls it a jangle. I wouldn't call it a jangle, but you know what I mean. That part of the bass, so that you can actually make it out in certain places, not just the bottom end. And because the fuzz, that one doesn't really affect the low end that much, it just dirties it up a bit, and it doesn't like over fizz the top end. I completely understand why she would prefer that to the dark glass. Every time somebody puts a fuzz on the bass, I irk. I was like, why would you do that? These fuzzes also don't actually put that much drive on as you would think.
Yeah.
Like sometimes fuzzes are like a complete like squaring off of the wave.
Yeah.
These
sound
don't
almost unusable to me. Well, for my style it would be, but like
absolutely.
I've never heard a fuzz tone and go, that sounds amazing. It always just sounds like almost unusable.
Well, my inspiration for the fuzzes come from the doom genre, where it actually sounds more like a really heavily struggling orange amp, rather than that classic fuzz tone, where it's more like the headroom is completely gone, but it's actually it's from volume and not from overdrive, not from clipping, like artificial clipping. And I think that's why these work well, for me at least, and that's why they don't have that top end kind of weird fuzziness. But it does also mean you don't have a time. You can't chug with them. They're just too floppy in the bottom end. You know what I mean? Like the bottom end is gone. Like you go tuk 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 and it just goes. Blah, blah, blah.
It's funny. I just remembered there a pedal I did have for a while that I totally forgot about, and it was a fuzz. Do you ever hear of the Mxr Blue Box?
Mm-mm.
And it's a fuzz and an octave blend.
All right.
That you could it was a fuzz and you could blend an octave down with it. I think it was an octave down. And because I tuned so low, it didn't like the low A, so it would just go nuts. So the two, I thought I could use it like for really weird, like horrible sounds between songs, for interludes and things.
Yeah.
But it was just completely unusable because it's like it couldn't track the low A on the 7-string, and it would just turn to like completely unusable. So then you had to turn that back out with that octave, and all it was a fuzz, and it was just way too like unusable for me.
Well, if the more the more kind of bass you push through your transistors or through your op amps, the more you get a fuzz style distortion in your pedal. So usually there's not a huge amount of difference between the fuzz and the distortion. It is usually a distortion. They just cut the low frequencies much harsher.
Yeah.
And so you really only have like the frequencies that you want from a guitar coming through. But otherwise there's not really that much difference between the two in the way that they generate the sound.
Yeah. I think I sold that off years ago because it was just unusable. Like once you started tuning, like you could place it on the 7-string. Once you started going, I think you got to maybe B at most, and then after that it was just all over the shop. Like the tracking was way off.
Yeah,
it's completely unusable. And then the fuzz, I couldn't even tell you if it was a good sounding fuzz, but for what I play, I wouldn't need that. I just wanted the fuzz with the low to make it sound like really, really horrific sounding between songs. But it was just
look,
They couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the low notes.
There was a guy that is selling a pedal that makes random fart sounds every time you strum your guitar.
Yeah,
So
I've seen that. Yeah. What was that other crazy one? That Korg one that everyone was using. The Miku. Did you see
the
that
Miku,
one?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's I think nowadays you can build anything, and somebody will go, "Oh, that looks interesting."
The more ridiculous you make it. Have you seen that new? Have you seen that new TC Electronics pedal they unveiled last week? It's called the Infinity or something. It basically takes. It's actually really cool. Like it can take a little snapshot of something you've played, and make it like into ambience. And then you can play over it and stuff. There's some demo videos there. It's really cool. I've not seen anything like it as a pedal.
I need to check that out. That sounds
And then
interesting.
it has different settings like that you can change with the rate, mess with the rate and things, to get it to affect the thing in a different way.
Yeah.
So it'll just take it'll capture a moment in time that you've played, and then it'll just descend that into like feedback or delayed, like an ambient thing. Then you can play over the top of it. Really interesting, actually.
But weren't they also the one that made the band in a box pedal, the kind of looper thing with the drum tracking and the bass? Was that TC? I can't remember if that was TC or not.
They do make good looper pedals, actually. The Ditto loopers.
Yeah,
I've actually got one of them actually as well, the mini one. I have one of them actually.
I had the big fancy one, the one that that you had the little mic with that could track the beats.
Right.
So you could set it, you could put it in a mode which, and then it would perceive the drums, the kind of main tempo. It'll take that off the drums, which is terribly useful because it means that you can play live with it, and the drummer can slide around a bit in his tempo, and it won't affect. And your phrase that you recorded will change appropriately without changing the pitch.
Yeah, that's actually really clever.
Genius, right? Absolute genius. And I had it and we tried it and it's absolutely genius. But you have to know how to use it. If you used it, and I made a few mistakes. What mistake did I make? Oh, yeah. So one thing it didn't do, it didn't adjust well after it thought something was a certain tempo. So so let's say I started and I put a loop in, then it kind of assumed a tempo according to my playing, and I think that might have happened. If the drums then kick in, it gets confused. But if the drums are playing and you're using it as you should, so you're playing with the drums, you press your record button, it records it while keeping track of the drums tempo, and you press the playback, then the drummer can do what he likes. He can slow down, he can speed up, and it absolutely tracked it, no problem. But there was an issue with if you didn't make sure that it had the correct tempo before you kind of record. But I mean, that's, to be honest, that's kind of obvious. So there were a couple of issues because on that first album I had quite a few things that I was adamant we only play as a 3-piece. We just stay a 3-piece, but I needed 2 guitar tracks sometimes. And that's why I got it.
Right.
So that we don't need that extra guitarist. And it really worked. It really, really worked. It was very, very cool. It was probably one of the most useful things. Because don't they also do that double tracker?
Yes, the Mimic.
The Mimic, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one pedal I still want to buy.
I know a few people that have them, and I think it's the way you use it. I think if you don't have a stereo rig, it's not so useful.
No, absolutely. That's why I was surprised why at all they brought out the small one, the single one.
Yeah.
Because all it did was just double up the one track into one amp. That's all it did. It just kind of made it thicker, if you like. It
Yeah.
sounded as if two guitars were playing in mono. Who gives a shit? I mean, that's really the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Why would you do that? But using it as a proper stereo from one guitar that doesn't have phase issues, man, genius.
Yeah, they have some clever stuff. Apparently, they're the flashback delays they make. They brought out same as the Hall of Fame reverb I have. They brought out the Hall of Fame 2 and the flashback 2, and apparently the delay, if you hold down the switch, it'll put a reverse delay on it.
Oh
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
can
I
be
saw
you can
that.
be you can be playing and you've just delay set, and then when you hold down the switch, it'll turn into a reverse delay.
Yeah.
I
Where
think the
did I see
reverb
that?
does the same. I think the reverb does the same. It'll play it back all the way.
I literally saw that the other day.
Yeah.
Some YouTube channel I saw that. Um, yeah,
They do some clever stuff, Tisha. I've got quite probably next to Side Effect. They're probably the most pedals I have by a company is probably by them. But yeah, they do some very very clever stuff. But I think it's a mix. They use the digital to get more out of the analog. I think you can change it internally as well, whether you want to have it true bypass or buffered. Some of the pedals you can open it and change that yourself.
yeah. Well, that was we're past that now. Like in the beginning, that we were talking about this um, some of the pedals from I think that we were talking about delays or something like that. I was gonna ask that question. You were talking about a specific pedal. I was gonna ask you if it's a digital one or not, because unfortunately, it seems to me like when it comes to time effects, analog just doesn't cut it, and that's where you kind of have to go to digital.
Yeah.
Because they can just do so much more digitally with the signal. I want to get to this point here because I find this might be interesting. Are there too many clones?
Oh my god. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Certainly
that's
Tube Screamer clones anyway.
yeah. See, I wonder. Probably the first culprits were those that said, "Ah, see a Tube Screamer. If you want it modded, bring it to me." I think they were probably the first culprits when it comes to clones, because
Healy and copies,
clones sometimes clones are just exact copies. You know, somebody just gets the schematic
yeah.
and makes an exact copies. But actually, I think most of the clones, and I do believe that as well, that's the case when it comes to the Chinese stuff. I don't think they're clones. I think they are circuits that are built to do what the other circuits did. I don't think that they are copies, like Behringer copies Boss, kind of like, okay, here's the schematic, here's the parts, right? Let's just do it cheaper. That's it. I think that they copy the idea behind the pedal. Okay, this is supposed to do this. Because they never sound the same. They're not like they don't sound the same, but they sound the same. Does that make sense? It's
Yeah,
like,
the same flavor, but not quite the same
yeah,
strength. Like there's a tiny ingredient missing. And they may be doing that on purpose, though, just to
I
make sure
hope
it's
so.
not quite the same.
I hope so.
Although I think, from what I've been led to believe, you can't copy it. You can't like patent or copyright point-to-point wiring anyway. So that's why they can
No, I
only.
don't think that's true. I think that there's a lot of this going around. You can, I think you can copyright a schematic. The problem is, and that's what pisses me off about the guitar community for a lot of them, when they go and say you can't copyright a tone. No, you can't. But that's purely because it's kind of impossible. But you can copyright a circuit. You can check, many circuits have the copyright on it. Because a circuit is a specifically designed functional piece. You are saying, I'm using this circuit with this layout, with these values of caps and resistors and whatever. So this is something that I have made and I can copyright. I'm not so sure that that is necessarily true. But the whole idea that you can't copy a tone is, in my opinion, you should be able to. It's just, how would you ever be able to enforce it? I think that's the biggest difference. And that's why I made the video ages ago about the Kemper, because I mean, we get pissed off when somebody copies anything, right? Why is that not the case when it comes to amps or pedals? Why is that not the case? Why does the guitar playing or the music community believe that it does, that kind of moral stance doesn't apply to them, to not copy somebody else's shit, right? And the point I was making was, like, take Grant. Grant's a classic example, right? The stuff I've done is I've taken circuits that exist. I've done my homework to understand what they do, and from there I've kind of slowly built up what I want to do and kind of amended and stuff. But I've not went and took the Boss schematic and changed out one capacitor, or I took, you know what I mean? It's like, there are people who make clones, and a clone, in my opinion, is a copy. Because if it's a true clone, then it's a copy. You can't say something is a clone if it's not a clone. So there are those that build tube screamers and sell them, and then put another name on it, or say, okay, here's my home built tube screamer clone. But essentially, it is a copy. You're making a copy. I mean, Dee does art, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Imagine somebody goes and takes her drawings and sells it off as their own, or sells it off as hers, but doesn't give her any money for it.
Yeah.
It's there, to me, not a smidgen of difference. Like, somebody sat there, designed that circuit to do this, that, and the other, and so when somebody else comes along and just copies it, to me, it's copying at the end of the day. Now, the people have taken advantage of the kind of people that used to build pedals in the past, that actually came up with most of the kind of base structural kind of schematics that everybody now uses. The Tube Screamer schematic, the Rat schematic, all the different fuzzes. And the reason they did that is because those were people who were just messing around. They didn't think of it from a commercial point of view. They were trying to make cool stuff and then share it. And somebody asked a question, they would help. And hey, use this one, or use this schematic, or I'll help you with that, right? So this whole kind of communal, friendshipy kind of bunch of people, basically, we're just taking the piss out of now. Because people just clone their stuff left, right, and center. Now, they probably never copyrighted it, and they're probably absolutely fine with people using it. But that's not the point. The point is, they're copying. And that's why I have such a problem with the Kemper, because the Kemper allows you, it's a Xerox machine, right? I don't have the money to buy myself a Mesa Boogie and a Mesa Boogie cab. So I come to you with my Kemper, right? I snapshot the whole thing, and there I have it. And then I go home. Or even worse, I go to Guitar. I buy a £1,000 amp and cab. I bring it home. I snapshot it. I take it back on Monday morning and say, "It's not my thing, man. You know, how about that Marshall? I'll try the Marshall." I do the same thing. I can do that over and over. So it's not the Kemper per se that's the problem, because it's just a tool. It's the way that people end up using it. And they forget that even Marshall, even Gibson, even with the problems they've got, anybody that does anything, they put the work into something, and if you just go and copy the stuff, there's a problem. And that's why I also never had a lot of issues with Amplitube, because nearly all their stuff's licensed by the original people. If they have Orange in there, they work with Orange. So either they're paying Orange, or Orange is cool with it, one or the other. But at least there's a discussion.
Do you not think the amp companies missed the trick there with working with stuff like Kemper for the packs, rather than having other people do it from their studios?
That's what I mean. It's like if you look at if you look at Amplitube, there was a combination. There was a working together for most of the stuff. It's pretty clear. Kemper went and built a Xerox machine. So it's really not, in my opinion, up to the amp companies to do that, because here's the problem, right? I've got a massive manufacturing plant, and I've got a whole bunch of employees that are building my amps. Now I go to Kemper and license, and I can't ask a lot for it, right? If I put a patch into the Kemper for, I don't know, I'm just Marshall, top of the head, how much can I really charge for that? And how quickly is that going to be like copied?
Yeah.
You know, it's, and let's not forget about actually anybody trying to sit behind an amp and dial in the tone rather than just switch a button on. I mean, that's another whole story. But why am I ranting again?
It's a funny one. It's a funny one. The whole Kemper thing. Like I can see why bands at a certain level use the stuff. Obviously, too, like touring, and there's less money in music, so the logistics is a huge thing now.
No, but I never made an argument against that.
Yeah, just the way it's been abused.
That is not my argument at all. I completely understand it. I completely understand why somebody would rather have a neural or a Axe-Fx in its rack rather than slogging a couple of Marshall stacks with him. Completely understand that. But even Axe-Fx, I don't know. Is there any kickback from the hundreds of gear that they have got in their software packs in there? Is there any kickback to the originals? I don't know. So I'm asking a question more than making a statement.
I don't know. I know a friend of mine has one, and I believe that it's based off of Friedman amp is the patch he uses for his main rhythm tones. But I don't know. I don't think how they go about doing that. Maybe it's similar to like the way they do the amp sims, the way they model it. It doesn't like. I suppose Kemper, for lack of a better way of putting it, just goes in and steals the amp soul and out the door, isn't it? It's a little.
I don't know.
There was an amp company a year or two ago that actually built something into the amp that could tell you that the amp had been snapshotted. And was it Rev? Or it might have been Diesel. Might well have been Diesel, actually. Some of them amp companies, I remember hearing about it from the NAM videos, might have been on Anderton's. And the amp, so if people bought the amp and brought it home and done that, snapshot it and then brought it back, the amp would actually tell you that it had been profiled.
Well, it's quite easy for a little piece of electronics to know if an amp is profiled.
Yeah.
Because it'll just listen out for a sine wave from 20 to 20,000. And if it goes through, it'll go, hey, somebody's running a sine wave through me. Yeah. And there's only one reason you would do that, and that's to.
I don't know if they've done anything. I don't know if they've done anything with it, or what actually became of it, or whether it was even put in the amp or not. But it was definitely a thing.
I was going to ask. I mean, what was their end game?
I don't know. They didn't really say, from what I can remember. The video I watched about it didn't really say. They just done it, and I don't know if they just put it there to maybe deter people, or like, we might do this, we could do it, or whatever it was. I can't remember who it was.
The thing about this whole schematic not able to copy it, or not being copyrightable, is it can't be true, because there've been enough cases where wasn't it Mesa who were trying to sue Soldano, or the other way around?
The other way around initially.
There was all sorts of stuff in the past already where people were going, oh, hold on, that's my circuit. I don't know. Personally, I think it's look, I copied music in the past too, like there was nobody's business, but I didn't do it to get the music. I did it because I wanted to hear if I wanted the music most of the time.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that you'll probably notice that people who don't have a problem with this sort of thing are people who've never put themselves on paper before. These are not people who've ever created anything that they feel has worth. The moment that you create something, I mean, you can go to Dee right now. I'm sure if she's listening, I bet you she'll say the same. She would be hyper pissed off if somebody profits from her stuff without any sort of acknowledgement or kickback, or in any shape or form. It's hers. It comes from you. And I don't see any difference when it comes to music or amps or circuits or speaker design or anything like that. I just don't see a difference. And I think because it was so general and it has always happened, that people now feel as if they have a right to it in some shape or form.
Yeah, we've almost become numb to it. Like, it's just the done thing now, isn't it? It's
exactly as if it's
so
cool.
rife. People are just like, oh yeah, it's just immune. You don't even notice it now.
Yeah,
it's just normal.
Here's my favorite question. So, as I'm getting older, and I've got young kids who need to live in a world where they can actually breathe air and have some social responsibility, and as money is tight and gazillions of reasons, I'm really against a throwaway society, over commercialized. I mean, I've kind of always been like that. I never needed the latest phone or the newest car or the newest brand of trainers. It's just never interested me. Maybe that's natural. But IKEA, Amazon Prime, fucking all these pound shops, Wilco's, you name the shops nowadays, they're all just Aldi, Lidl. They all just sell shite that you actually don't really need. It's all kind of like quality that, yeah, it'll last a bit, but you probably will buy it again in the future. So we're in a society now where we literally just buy shit for the sake of buying shit because it's not that expensive, or it's perceived to be not that expensive. And I'm wondering if we have now entered, well, not now, but probably 10 years ago roughly, we entered a time when pedals and amps and guitars have become the same.
Disposable.
Yeah. Here's a good reason why. If I went and bought a cheap guitar 20 years ago, it was shit. And it would kind of enthuse me to not buy a cheap shit guitar again. But now I can buy the same price guitar and it's actually pretty decent. Yeah. So much so that I might want the green one too.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Harley Benton, that other brand that they're always on about. Tons of YouTubers went and bought it. I mean, they were like 120 quid, and you got a Gibson kind of style that was actually half decent with binding, right? Like, pedals. I mean, nearly all the kind of sub £50 pedals are. I mean, do you really need to buy them? Are we there?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's probably never been a better time to be a guitar player with all the gear we've got. But yeah, like you couldn't. This stuff was not available when I when I was starting out. Like you can buy pedals on a whim just to try it to see if you like it, and you don't feel like you've broke the bank. Whereas when I started playing, if you wanted, like as you're saying, like them distortions, if you got the cheap one, wasn't that many of them. Now there's like loads of them. Whereas you'd have to save up to get like the boss one.
Yeah, but there's also the choice as well, right?
Yeah.
So 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I could buy Boss pedals, really cheap Rock Tech ones, which actually weren't cheap for me at the time anyway. Ibanez, there were maybe 5 brands that you would see in the shops, and if you went into the shops, there would be one small section of pedals. There would be a couple of distortions, a couple of delays, maybe a phaser of sorts, and some wahs, and then you're done.
Yeah.
That's it. Now it's just like this mountain of not just different brands, but prices, capabilities, you name it. And I think the main culprits actually in this whole thing is not true guitarists or people who are in bands and stuff. I actually think the biggest culprits are the hobbyists. Let's take me for example, right? People like me, in a band in the younger years, started working, band and interest kind of spread apart, fell apart, family. Then at some point later on, maybe the kids are old enough, they don't take up so much of your time, you now have some money in the bank, and you start revisiting all your old hobbies. These are the people that I also think are at the moment the biggest buyers of gear. They have some space in their house, maybe one of the kids left the house, they've got a room that they can now convert into a studio, and they can throw themselves into that hobby again. And they've got the money to buy the cheap stuff, the expensive stuff, they've got the time to mess around with it. Fuck knows, they might even be divorced, they've got shitload of time on their hands, I don't know. I've got a feeling that that's probably the kind of one of the biggest reasons we have this explosion.
I just had a thought there too when you said that. You know, I know it's a relatively recent thing. The mini pedals, everyone brings out like the mini tube scale and all that. Do you think that's adding to it as well? Because like you go, look at the size of that pedal, I can buy 2, I can fit another one on my board there. Like if you think for I don't have any of them. Well, actually, the Ditto pedal I've got is a mini one. But like, you think for every like boss size pedal, and like a lot of the mini pedals, you'd fit 2 of them on that space. And if you have a pedal board and you go, I could squeeze another one there. So you just buy one because you can, because you now have that much space. Whereas before you'd have that.
So okay, so I've thought about this a lot actually. Because when you are designing the pedals, I also want them to be ergonomically useful. By that I mean I want the plugs to be all on one side. I don't want it to be too big. So someone goes, well, I don't want to fit this massive thing on my board because I only have this much space. And I want these other pedals on. I don't want to make them too small because the guy might have big feet, and if they're too close to each other, they might be pressing 2 pedals switches at the same time. So I actually think about this a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think I have an answer, but it's definitely true that you can fit more pedals if you use the small ones. But I think it's a personal taste thing, because I did one small one, which was the hair showing that I wanted to see if I can fit it into one of the small mini enclosures. And man, was it a squeeze, but I got it in there, and it was so pretty. It was so nice, this tiny little thing. Especially with the graphic and the colors that I chose. And it sold, number one, but I thought to myself, what does, because when you want to sell stuff, you're trying to think, well, what does the majority think? Does the majority think the smaller ones are better or not? And then I think there's some people who go, well, bigger is better. There's a psychological thing behind it. It's like, oh, nice big pedal, right? There's a guy in America who started building pedals a year ago, and he's done really well. And all his stuff is this massive fucking things. And some of them only have 3 knobs on it. There's no reason to be that massive. And I'm not talking about the bigger enclosures. I'm not talking about this size. I'm talking about the even bigger than this.
Yeah.
And so my only conclusion is that literally, because there's so much choice and the people that buy stuff, they will buy it regardless. There will be somebody that buys it. And by what I mean by that is somebody who buys it and is happy with to buy it. Because you don't really see people making comments like, oh, it would be cool if that was in a smaller enclosure, or it would be cool if that was in a bigger enclosure. You don't really ever hear comments like that.
No.
You know, which is really strange to me, since building pedal boards is such a big deal nowadays and everybody wants to do it, that the choices of the size of the pedal and where your power and your jacks go in is not of a bigger consequence to people is really, to me, weird.
Yeah.
It's as
I'm actually in the process of putting together mine a new pedal board for me at the moment, and it is kind of funny how awkward it can be.
Yeah. No, and if you then have different sizes, my God.
Yeah, or different heights and things. Yeah, I'm trying to keep make it that I can have the foot switch from the Mxr on the front of the board as well, so it's all in one. So I've not got 2 different things. And I think I can just about pull it off.
I honestly believe that there should be one. The Boss is actually too big, but to me, this is absolutely the perfect size. The standard 560B enclosure size. With a well-designed PCB, you can fit nearly anything in here. You've got space for easily up to 9 knobs.
Yeah.
I mean, how many pedals have more than 6, let's say? You still have ample room for your foot switch that you don't like step on your knobs. And like I said, if you do the PCB properly, you can have all the inputs on the front end. I mean, imagine how neat that is.
Yeah.
If everybody built into this size, and if you put 2 together, you've got at least a foot in between the switches. So the chances of you misstepping or maybe stepping on 2 at a time are pretty small.
I think having the jacks on the front of the pedal is a better idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially for a board, because then you can put them and it keeps all the wiring neater. Makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, actually, why I went to the slightly bigger enclosure. Because the way I want to still hand build them, it is nearly impossible for me to fit some of these, the amount of because I'm going to have 1 switch and 3 knobs on each of them.
Right.
That I wouldn't be able to, and the circuitry is bigger inside, I wouldn't be able to do it in this comfortably. And so I thought, if I go a little compromise on the size, it means I can have all the inputs at the top, on one side. That's also why I did these this way, is that instead of having jack power, to me that makes no sense, because if you're really losing the space on the side for a jack, you can just as well have the power jack there too, and then maybe somebody can use what they gain here on their pedal board, either turning it or by shifting it somewhere, you know, make some sort of decision around where they want to put it. But no, this is very interesting, because that is obviously the other problem that is caused by the small ones. You'll notice that most of the small ones will have power jack.
And the jacks is offset, aren't they, because of the pedal being smaller?
And the jacks are offset because they don't fit together inside otherwise. So I think that they're quite nice. If you look at people who buy just the small Donner or E&O ones and they make a pedal board with it, because they can literally fit a whole pedal board on like one strip.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that could really be very, very cool for a gig rig, especially nowadays that they are actually half decent pedals. You know, you're gonna get a half decent pedals from these places. So you've got a cheap rig, it's small. Because it's cheap, you'll happily take it to to a gig. The pedals aren't that expensive, so if they do get lost or break the gig, you're not going to cry over it. You're not running around with your 400-pound Strymon and your 300-pound flippin' clone. You know what I mean? I mean, I think they make a lot of sense, but the only ones I've ever bought were to try out a demo. I've never bought one of the small ones because I like the form factor. I've never made that decision that way. I've always kind of opted for this size. I think this is literally the optimum size for pedals.
I think I've only got one of them, the mini ones. It's the TC Ditto Looper, the mini looper. That's the only one I think I've got, or I've ever had of the mini pedals.
That's also a thing where Joyo went wrong with when they brought out after they brought out the first set that they kind of became famous for, that everybody demoed. After that, they brought out this weird set that were really small. They were like this size, and then to protect the knobs, they had like a little cover. So you open the cover and then you can tweak your knobs and you can close it again. But they were really tiny, but literally the size of maybe 2 matchboxes. But the size, in my opinion, was awkward because it wasn't the full length of a pedal, so it wasn't like thin and long. It was just tiny.
Right.
So where would you put it? You would lose the amount of space that you would for a normal pedal.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But you wouldn't gain you wouldn't gain anything because you couldn't put anything else close to it, because the way that the other pedals and have to like sit next to it.
It's almost like they just stamped it out of a regular size pedal and cut it out.
It was I would say it's probably half the size. It was probably like that.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
It didn't really make sense. You kind of got the idea first. They thought, oh, it would be nice to have these small pedals and people can fit stuff. But actually, practically, I don't think the sizes work. Whereas I think the ones that we're talking about now, the kind of small factors, I think they kind of make sense.
Yeah, they're probably the same length that way as a regular one. So that they're narrower. See, width-wise, you're going to gain all the way.
I've got one here, man. What are we talking about? Is this that same enclosure? Yeah. Oops. Okay. What did we say about the cheap pedals not breaking? The knob came off. This size, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, they're all pretty much, from what I can see, roughly that sort of idea.
No, I like it. I do. I like them, but I don't think I've ever made the decision to buy a small one because it was small.
Yeah, same.
I don't think that ever really. I had that kind of thought. But trying to get a half decent circuit in them is.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. I'm trying to put an elephant in the mouse hole.
Yeah, but I mean, if you use PCBs and board mounted connections and all that, I think you can do quite a you can fit quite a lot in there. If you kind of want to hand solder and hand build it, I don't think so. Who's this? Mede Leute. Hallo. Biernase. Hello. Somebody's called Biernase, which is a good name because it means beer nose. I can relate to that. Who was left? I think we're done. Do folk purchase gear because they don't know how? Do folk purchase a lot of stuff because they don't know how to use their gear? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah.
I think the answer is yes, because
Yeah.
if they knew their gear, they wouldn't have bought an item that they didn't use.
Yeah.
There was a comment I just saw briefly on the Toad of Circles website, Facebook page, and I was wanting to comment on it because I thought it was worth commenting on it. And it was being a little bit abrasive. He was saying if gear reviewers, he said something like, if I see, no, how do I phrase this? The last thing I want to hear from a gear reviewer is what VST and AMSM he used, meaning he wants gear pedals, for example, to be reviewed through an amp, not through a VST. So he wants the pedal to be plugged into the front of an amp, the amp to be mic'd up, and that's how the demo should be done. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And my first thoughts were, well, it's kind of true. I kind of agree with him, but actually, practically, I'd rather have somebody demo gear through a VST than a badly mic'd up amp.
Yeah.
The other problem with amps is that, what kind of amp? I mean, then you need to go into detail. What kind of speaker have you got in there? What kind of amp is it? If you're demoing a blues driver through a boogie, make no sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes actually using a VST, also my experience is that the VST actually allows you to demo the pedal in itself better than through an amp, because firstly you can make sure you get a decent sound of it. Secondly, you can, because you've got amp choices, you can choose the right amp that kind of generally goes with that sort of pedal. And you don't have to worry about the neighbors and all that sort of things, because I still believe that you can't really record an amp without putting it to a decent level, which for amps are usually too loud for domestic kind of applications.
Yeah.
So although I completely agree, a pedal should go into the front of an amp so that interaction can be perceived at least. But actually overall, it's actually probably better the other way around, practically. And the reason I said that is because if you bought a pedal and it doesn't at least come close to what you thought it was and what it should be doing, then you haven't watched any videos about it, or you didn't take any you didn't really kind of think through what the reviewer was doing with the pedal to understand if it would translate to what you would be doing with it. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that people do buy gear because they don't know how to use, or probably didn't understand what they were buying in the first place entirely.
How do they react with the VSTs though? Like,
I don't think there's any difference.
no?
No, I think the difference, I think there's certain scenarios where there would be a difference. Like, I don't think you could properly demo a boost pedal through a VST. Distortion, absolutely, because the distortion is done through the pedal. The preamp is clean usually, so is the power amp, so you're not getting any of that from the amp. I think there's only very few that you can't really properly do, and sometimes the impedance is just not happy, so it just doesn't sound right. But you really get that very fast if if you put a pedal through the VST, through the interface, you realize really quickly if this is going to go or not. And if that doesn't work, there's always the option of putting it through an active DI first. That usually kind of solves the problem.
I go through a DI all the time in the house.
Well, I always did in the past, but this Behringer interface that I have now, also the smaller one that I had, is so much better without the DI, in my opinion, to my ears. I might have to spend more money on my DI. Maybe that's the thing, but it just.
I had a Behringer DI first, just to see if I needed it, and it actually died on me. So I actually have
one.
A silver one with black rubber feet on it.
Same I've got, yeah.
I had it for about a year, I think, and I ended up buying that Sign Effect WDI.
Yeah.
Way better. Sounds cleaner and everything.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like the DI is making my input a little bit squishy.
Right.
Can't put my finger on it except squishiness. If I go straight into the interface, the previous one I had one of those Elasis IO ones. It didn't like going straight into the interface, but with this one, I feel like I get a much cleaner tone in. I think what people forget is that the modern amp sims are not just EQ curves. They are digitally recreated components that are digitally act the way an amp would. So the interaction is actually much better than the naysayers think. And all they need to do is actually pull up a half decent VST with an half decent IR loader and half decent IRs, and play through them with the lowest latency that they can muster on a high sample rate. You can clean up an amp. I can in fact, I did a video on that, because if I play through an amp that cleans up, that is high gain, and you can clean it up by just turning your guitar volume down, it does exactly what an amp does. It does exactly the same thing. It cleans up, no problem. Because I think that there's the VST doesn't treat your guitar like an amp in the traditional way. It treats the signal from the guitar in the traditional way from the VST onwards. So you don't have the interaction between the guitar and the interface as you do with an amp. And then the rest is just ones and zeros. So if you and I think this is another reason why people don't get half decent tones out of VSTs. I think you need to treat your VST as your whole chain in itself. So you think about it as from the VST, the input, that's your input. This is not your input. The interface is not your input. So from a tweaking point of view.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use Amplitube because it's probably the easiest. In Amplitube, you've got your input, and you can set your input gain, not distortion. Your level, your input level. So just like a normal amp, it means that the signal that the amp gets from the guitar can be higher or lower, just like it can be in real life, by turning your volume down, or by having lower or higher output pickups, or by having a volume pedal, an active volume pedal, or whatever. The same idea. And the amp is then designed, the VST is then designed to react accordingly. So, and you can test that, like if your level into your VST isn't good. So if you don't gain stage properly, so the amount of input that you're getting from your guitar into your interface, that interface has got a nice strong signal sending through to the DAW, that sends a half decent signal to the VST. I think if you take care of all those steps, you get decent sounds and believable sounds. But that's why I think some pedals work as well, because the piece that the VST sees is nothing different from what the amp sees. It sees that distorted wave file, and it's coming in, and now it's got to deal with it in some way. I think the weak part is the interface and how it treats the signal coming in and how it converts it into a digital signal. And that's why I think some pedals don't work, because they might overpower without clipping, or the impedance is just not working together nicely or something. I think.
So you think that's where the digital thing loses, like what people call the feel of the amp?
No, the feel of the amp is I think it's very simple. If you had a good 50-watt monitor speakers, big ones, nice big ones, and you're right close to them, and you're playing through a VST really loudly, you put your monitors on nice and loud, and you make sure that there is no latency between your playing and the sound, so the lowest latency that your computer can deal with, I think you'll get quite close. I think you'll get very close to playing with an amp. But I mean, I've got a 80-watt PV next to me here, and I usually have it on enough to be too loud if both my neighbors weren't 80 years old and both were deaf. They would be complaining, I'm guaranteed. Now you can't compare that 12-inch speaker right next to me with 20, 30-watt monitor speakers on your desk. That's, I think, where people lose, or what they perceive to be the difference. You can't feel it. You don't have the vibration in the floor. You don't have that air pushing. You've got none of that with monitors. And then if you don't set up your PC correctly, you've got latency. And that latency is basically like playing catch up. So I think it's those are the main factors. It's volume, in my opinion, volume and latency that creates that feeling that you're not in touch with your amp.
Yeah,
that's my half-educated opinion about that.
you could be right. I don't know enough about the technical side of it, but I can definitely feel there's something. Like, I can definitely feel it. I play now with both quite a bit, but yeah, obviously like when I'm in the studio.
How many watts is your Mesa Boogie?
It's 100 watt.
Yeah. And how big is the room that you've got it in?
Oh yeah, it's quite big. It's cranked, like, yeah. I know that's definitely a factor, like.
Okay, and on your computer when you're tracking, how big are your headphones?
I don't even use the headphones. I've got monitors up here.
Yeah, and how big are they? I think that whole it and also we have a psychological thing that goes with us. Here's my fuck off amp. Here's my shitty little VST digital thing. I think there's a massive amount of psychology happening as well.
Okay. I don't feel like see when I'm writing or home or playing through it, don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. Like, I don't have any issue with them. The ESTs, I use it all the time. Like, I play near enough every day, and I'm using that like 90% of the time, other than once or twice a week when I'm in the studio. I don't feel like I remember years ago buying a Line 6, the HD pod. Remember that one? I hated that, and sold it. It just sounded awful to me. The DST's ahead of that.
But they never had a good reputation of sounding good.
No, a friend of mine had weirdly the one before the one had before, just the pod, the pod live XT.
Yeah.
That friend of mine had that, and then this HD one replaced that, and I actually think the older one sounded better.
Yeah, but are you talking about the effects or the amp emulation?
Oh, the amp emulations on them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See, I would never use. I don't think. I think that's very tricky. I think that's where a lot of them fall, unless they're really good an amp emulation and cab emulation on a on a floor kind of setup thing. If that's not 100%, I think that's a real issue.
Yeah, I was just using it into the computer, like just for demo and stuff. It wasn't like but yeah, I mean, you didn't have. I don't know if the IR stuff existed back then or not, or if it did, it would have been really in its infancy. So that would have been. That's the game changer with it.
Remember, you told me last time or the time before, you said a lot of these bands that were using Axe effects and Kempers and had like a clean stage, they're all going back to having an amp on the stage again.
Or even just a cabinet.
Just a cabinet usually. Yeah.
Sometimes, just the cabinets, yeah.
But to me, that's part of the, dare I say, proof that I might be onto something, is that there's such a difference between a big speaker and a cab pushing the air, and the whole vibration that is kind of nuanced through your playing and all that happening to playing through monitors, even half decent monitors. I think that's a lot where that disconnection comes from, and why they want a cab back on the stage.
A friend of mine is a front of house engineer. He tours all over the world doing it, and he says to me, he said this on many occasions, he reckons that if you got a band that has two guitar players, actually I'll tell the story first and I'll go back to him, how it replied to him. He reckons that if the two guitar players are on digital, you won't know the difference. But he says if you've got one guy on digital and one on a real amp, you can tell there's a difference. And the band he was in were that. He went with the Axe effects, and got an Axe effects and ended up going back to an amp because the other guy didn't. The other guy stayed on the amps, and then he just used the Axe effects with the 4 cable method for his effects. Like he's toured like all over the world, like doing front of house, and that's what he reckons. Is that if you've got one guitar player in a two guitar band and one's on an amp and one's on, say, a Kemper or something, you can tell there's something slightly different.
I would believe that. I would believe that 100%, because I think that the amp sims sound really good and really convincing, but that's because you usually only hear them by themselves, and they sound good by themselves. They sound good. So I had a slightly similar experience, because the last few stuff I've done, because it's actually out of practicality, what I've done is, because I now have the 4-channel interface, I can now do all my audio tracks at once when I'm trying to do demos or something. Before that, I had like one little audio recorder, and I was trying to record the guitar through the DAW and then amp summit, and it was a fuck around, right? So this way, now I've got a large diaphragm about half a foot from the speaker, and it captures the speaker really overall nicely. That goes into the DAW, and I've got a microphone, and then whatever else, I've got 2 slots open. So it was out of practicality that I went back to actually using the amp for most of the stuff that I'm trying to do. And although it doesn't sound as good as the VST from a cleanliness point of view, I prefer the tone.
Yeah.
I prefer the tone that way. Although I can go into Amplitube or anything else and probably get, from an aesthetic point of view, from a YouTuber point of view, a better tone. This to me feels more correct, more just better, just nicer to listen to. No, I think that's very, very obvious that when you hear an Axe-Effects, it sounds great. If you hear an amp, it sounds great. If you hear the two together, you know there's something happening.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily even be that the one sounds better than the other. It's just that there's something not right.
Yeah.
Something is
It's
off.
more. I think it's a present, like a push thing. There's just a punch, a weight behind the amp that the thing does. That's what he said was lacking, and that's why he went back, started using amps again, and he just used the Axe-Effects through his 4-cable method. He said it was that it was just something like a really punch that was coming from the amp that the digital just didn't quite like it. Yeah, but I think the tone. I don't think the tone's better in any way. But as I said, if the two guitar players went the digital way, you wouldn't normally even notice.
Yeah. So did he have a cab as well with him, or just straight into the desk?
No, they were using cabs. Cabs are on stage volume.
Because surely 100-watt cab and the two cabs are running at the same volume, they should be pushing exactly the same amount of air. If it comes from an amp head or just a power amp, you would think that it would be the same.
Not all amps have the same push either, though. I noticed that, like, when I switch between, if I go back and forth between Mesa or the PV, like there's a massive oomph you get from the Mesa that you just do not get from the other one.
Is that from the low end, do you think, that it just has more of, or do you think it's actually air that's being displaced that is different from one to the other?
Hard to say. Like, we had a guitar player in a couple of weeks back jamming with us, and we ran him through the PV. It was my amp, and the difference was massive. And I noticed it too. Like, whenever I do some, not very often, when I do flick back between the two amps to exactly the same cab and the same guitar, there's a huge difference in the room. Like, so it's, even between amps is different.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I wouldn't be so I wouldn't be up on the technicality of why that would be the case.
Yeah.
But
well, I don't think it matters. I think what matters is, I think this is what people forget when it comes to this digital and amp argument. It's the same reason why one person buys one guitar, another person buys another guitar, because you're the person that needs to know if you like one thing or the other, which is the one that inspires you to do what you want to do and do what you need to do. If the Axe-Effects is 10 times better than an amp, who cares if it doesn't do the creative thing that you need it to do for you? That thing that you want, that thing that you feel. So I sometimes feel as if the argument is kind of irrelevant, especially now that the amp sims are convincing. So it's not a case of, oh, they sound like a fucking 15-year-old bean pod from 96. They actually sound good. So the argument shouldn't really be around which one's better. It should be like, let people use the thing that inspires them to create something good and enjoy themselves.
You're a lot of bands now, like even on their albums, often the guitarist is VSTs now. Like, I know. And do you remember? Which is funny to think back. I don't know if you've ever heard of the band Whitechapel.
I've heard of them.
Whitechapel. This is going back a bit now. Actually, recorded an album, and all the guitars was done with Kempers. And when they actually told people, the online petition sprung up to get Whitechapel to re-record their album using real amps, and you're like, How unbelievably ridiculous is that? Like,
Listen, but you do realize that the fact that that happened proves that the only people that give a shit about this is other guitar players.
yeah,
Because if you said that same thing to just fans, they wouldn't even know what a Kemper is.
no,
'Cause they would
exactly,
have
yeah,
no reason. So
yeah,
it's literally just a guitar echo chamber
yeah.
snobbery.
And most guitar players, if any, probably wouldn't even have noticed, only for they actually said it in an interview. If that had just said nothing, none of them any the wiser.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That literally proves such a massive point and why people shouldn't even bother with this whole argument, because it's a non-argument. That Circle of Tone guy made another video, and he was commenting on the guy from Disturbed who was saying that, you know, rock isn't dead and metal isn't dead, and there's a lot of up and coming people, and there's a lot of people who keep the flag going, and in usual fashion, the guy from Circle of Tone kind of completely dismissed, with fairly decent points, why the guy from Disturbed is utterly wrong. And I do have to agree with quite a bit of it, but actually, what they all miss, and I don't think they miss it, they just don't mention it, is that the biggest problem that we face in this whole genre of not pop is that people are not making music for the people anymore. They're making music for other guitar players to impress them, or to not be ridiculed for their gear, or for all sorts of wrong reasons other than making music for people to enjoy, for the public.
Yeah.
They're making it for their other YouTube channels, or YouTubers, or guitar players, or forum people. They're not making the music for. Did you watch that video from Kola and the Swedish guy, the riff contest?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Did
yeah. I
you
watched
watch
it there the other day. Yeah, yeah.
What did you think?
Um,
I
it was
wasn't blown away, I can tell you that much.
no, there was the last guy, the guy that won it. Some of his playing was quite impressive, the way he put stuff together. The one before it was a bit, all the layers and things. I wasn't right into that.
It wasn't as bad as most stuff, but it did have a bit of that. Here's a guy trying to show off his guitar skills to other guitarists, rather than here's a guitarist trying to use his instrument to make some cool tunes. That was my takeaway, but it wasn't as bad as some stuff.
Yeah, and contests are always a bit weird though, because it gets really subjective, doesn't it? And
No, absolutely, it does. It's very subjective.
try and look for something different. Like, was one of them in particular, I was surprised they picked it. The guy, oh, I can't remember. Was he? He might have one of the honorable mentions at the end, when he kept changing his clothes and all that. I was playing more like almost like funk. That was actually he was the one that stood out the most, because it was almost the least metal of the lot of them.
Now I'm trying to read.
Guy with kind of long hair. It was like some of it was done in his kitchen. And
Oh yeah.
he actually stood out the most to me, just purely because he was the least metal of the lot of them.
Yeah, but if you listen to some of the comments that Kola gave, they were looking for something a little bit more interesting than just really complicated, low-tuned riffs.
Yeah.
So that part of it was at least fairly interesting, that they, you know, it would be interesting to see, actually it would be interesting to see more of the entrants, of the people that entered.
Yeah.
Because that would give an idea of how
what
they had to play with.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. To have like maybe a 2-hour, just a straightforward YouTube video, just that has all the entries in it. That would be really cool. Interesting to watch.
Well, that was sidetracked.
Yeah, I know, as always.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, look at this. 11:30.
Yeah.
Shit. Well, that's been interesting.
Yeah, new pedals is going to be a long one.
Did you think so?
Yeah.
Well, I actually thought that we would be to the point on this, to be honest. I thought we'd be like, yeah, that, yeah.
Maybe one of them topics that you didn't realize you thought certain things until you start talking about it, and then.
Well, I actually I tried to prepare myself mentally for some of the stuff, and
To be
I
fair,
really,
it's a market you're probably more involved in than me anyway. So, like, you would need to be thinking about it more.
yeah, but I still don't think of it as a. I still think of it as as me being a user rather than a. Because I mean, even the stuff that I've made is actually stuff I want, not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, as Grant says, if you want to make money with selling pedals, just sell all the obvious clones, all the
Yeah.
you know, because they get lapped up and stuff. But and I might actually do that as a not as a side project, but as a something to support the rest
Yeah.
financially. I'm contemplating that, but actually the stuff I've done has been me trying to find something that I like, that I want. So I don't really see myself. I just follow a lot of folk on Instagram and see what they do, see the kind of stuff they come up with, and
Clone it.
yeah, I find the aesthetics quite interesting that some are making. I think there's some really excellent stuff out there. I think there's more good stuff than bad stuff. I don't think there's actually any bad stuff out there at all. I think most things are actually, depending on what you want, what you need, obviously. I mean, it's not like things that everybody's going to be buying, but it's more like the stuff that's out there is if that's your thing, I think you're fine to buy it. There would be no reason why you wouldn't. There's no obvious reason why you shouldn't. It's more what I'm coming.
I don't think there's any pedals I need at the moment. But there's always that, isn't there, as a guitar player? It's like, I'm done now, ask me sorted. I don't need anything more. And then you say something. That new Teach electronic pedal, I must admit, that had me kind of.
Well, the Mimic is the one that I've been looking at, especially when we're just the 3-piece. But we're not trying to get another guitarist in, and then I won't need it. But if this turns out that it is going to be 3-piece going forward, I'll definitely spend the money on it. Definitely, because there's nothing. I don't want one guitar amp running, because I do want to play live again. I don't want one amp running, and I don't want 2 amps running with exactly the same signal either.
You can. A friend of mine uses a dual rig setup, and when they went to, I don't know if he still uses it or not, but when they went on tour to America, rather than having to have heads and things, he got like 2 distortion pedals and 2 power amp pedals.
Yeah.
For power 2 cabs, and I think he had a Boss delay on one of them, set really, really low, just to give it a little.
That's the usual trick. That was the trick before the Mimic. They would put they would sometimes go as far as putting a chorus on one as well.
Yeah.
Because the chorus slightly changes the wave of the one.
Yeah.
And then adding the delay, the very tiny delay, it just pushes them enough that they don't have phase issues.
But I think the Mimic's probably better because it's designed to simulate. It doesn't stay the same, doesn't it? It'll waver. So it'll sound more like 2 guitars.
It sounds like 2 guitars because the only real reason you need it is so that you don't have phase cancellation issues. That's why the Mimic was kind of developed. It wasn't to try and give somebody the option of stereo in that sense. It was more about giving you the stereo without phase problems.
Yeah.
Because building a stereo rig is nothing. Making sure that there's not like a completely dead spot somewhere in the audience because the waves, cancel each other out at exactly that point. or in the recording that it just sounds mono in certain angles and completely cancelled out on other angles depending on where you are in the speaker field. That was the real kind of motivation, I think, behind it, to prevent phase cancellation. Okay, this is cool. Let me know about next week. If you know early on if you can or can't make it, I might try and get Grant on.
Yeah.
Might get him on anyway. We told him he's gonna get hauled in at some point.
Yeah. We can ask a question and let him go.
Yeah, we can go. He won't even notice.
It'll be educational for everybody.
Yeah.
And people ripping off his ideas.
Oh man, shame.
Right. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, man. Thanks a lot and take care.
Thanks to anyone that stuck with us till the end.
Aye. Take it easy, man.
Catch you there. See you, mate.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.